So we've done the first bit of Marlowe as primary author. Let's nip on to the case for Marlowe as co-author. Marlowe in the Shakespeare canon, scholars first noticed this in the 1700s, particularly in the Henry VI plays and a few others. Recent stylometric analysis has seemingly confirmed it. We'll talk about that. And the New Oxford Shakespeare has got him down as definite co-author of the Henry VI plays. Early attributions include Edmund Malone, 1790. He says Marlowe was the author of one, if not both, of Henry VI, parts 2 and 3. Hallam, Dicefleis, Swinburne and Tuckerbrook all agree. So there's quite a long history. Obviously, there's disagreements during this time as well, but there's quite a lot of fairly decent scholars saying, yes, we think Marlowe had a hand in these plays. Then we get the first bit of early stylometric analysis by Mendenhall. Now, Mendenhall, some of you will know, was asked by a Baconian to try and show that Bacon was the author of Shakespeare's works. And Mendenhall compared Shakespeare's word lengths with those of a number of writers, including Bacon and including Marlowe. And he found that with Marlowe, it was more or less an exact match in terms of the frequency of different length words that the two writers used. You can't really see it on this reproduction of a graph, but that's two lines there. There's a solid line and a dotted line. One is Marlowe, one is Shakespeare. The dotted line is Shakespeare, and they completely overlay each other. There's hardly any mismatch at all. There's an almost precise correlation. Peter Very redid the Mendenhall experiment using late Marlowe with Shakespeare minus the comedies, and found that the match was even more precise if you took those data sets. If R was 1, you could say, yes, they're exactly the same. R was 0.998 with that data set. So they're very strong in terms of the word lengths that they favour. However, disintegrationists, such as the sort of the traditional scholars I mentioned previously, like Flay and Swinburne, etc., all the disintegrationists were strongly resisted. There was a big pushback in the 1920s, the mid to late 1920s, led by E.K. Chambers, really, and Peter Alexander. Peter Alexander said if Shakespeare ever set himself to imitate Marlowe, what he wrote would be indistinguishable from Marlowe at his best. Therefore, you can't tell them apart. He says there is no room for both Shakespeare and Marlowe in any one of the 4 plays, and the 4 plays in question are the Henry VI plays plus, it's the tetralogy, the first tetralogy. So he's basically saying, because you can't tell them apart, and they're in the folio, and that says the name William Shakespeare, therefore they're Shakespeare, we won't accept any argument. And for a long time then, from Peter Alexander till the beginning of the 2000s, that was accepted, that everything in the folio must be by Shakespeare. However, the idea of Marlowe didn't go away, in the sense that it was always couched as a strong influence. So I'm just going to race through a few quotes here that I've stripped the names off and just put the dates on, but you can find them on the International Marlowe Society website, or I can point you in the right direction. Marlowe was the first poet before Shakespeare who possessed anything like real dramatic genius, or who seemed to have any distinct notion of what a drama should be. But it is only Shakespeare who can do everything, and Shakespeare did not die at 29. That Marlowe must have stood nearer to him than any other dramatic poet of that time, or perhaps of any later time, is probably the verdict of nearly all students of the drama. Blank verse, as we understand it, as Shakespeare understood it, came into birth at the bidding of Christopher Marlowe. It was Marlowe who irrevocably decided the destinies of the romantic drama, and the whole subsequent evolution of that species, including Shakespeare's work, can be regarded as the expansion, rectification, and artistic ennoblement. But of all those illustrious dead, the greatest is Christopher Marlowe. He was the first, the only herald of Shakespeare. He first, and he alone, you guess there's a theme going on here, guided Shakespeare into the right way of work. Before him, there was neither genuine blank verse nor genuine tragedy in our language. After his arrival, the way was prepared, the paths were made straight for Shakespeare. These are Stratfordians speaking. Shakespeare quotes Marlowe, or alludes to his plays repeatedly. Practically the whole of Marlowe's work, as it's now known. The abundance of Shakespeare quotations, echoes, and allusions of Marlowe is especially important because he lets his other literary contemporaries severely alone. In short, Marlowe's historic achievement was to marry great poetry to the drama. William Shakespeare never forgot him. He's still echoing his phrases. Shakespeare, I suggest, only became Shakespeare because of the death of Marlowe, and he remained peculiarly haunted by that death. That's Jonathan Bate, I think, that one. That he was mightily impressed and influenced by Marlowe is not in doubt. It is also clear that in his earliest plays, Shakespeare stole or copied some of his lines, parodied him, and generally competed with him. Well, that's an assumption, speculation. Marlowe was the contemporary writer that most exercised him. He haunts Shakespeare's expression like a figure standing by his shoulder. So influence. The question then became, more recently in the last, well, 20 years, 15 years, can computers separate Marlowe from Shakespeare? Can we definitively separate Marlowe from Shakespeare? There was a claim that the styles could be told apart with a 99% accuracy. This came out with the New Oxford Shakespeare. And I'll tell you now that claim is bogus. I do think it's partly aimed to rule out wider Marlowe involvement by these methods. You know, if you can tell the two hands apart, and then we can say, well, here are the bits that Marlowe did, we can separate them out and all the rest is Shakespeare. Unfortunately, their methods were not everything they claimed to be. I have a whole, I'm just going to have to skim over the top of this as well. I have a whole sort of presentation on the methods and the shortcomings of the two things they use, one of which is ZETA, the other one is called WANs, or word association networks. Here's some basic shortcomings of ZETA. It's not robust on a play-by-play basis. Now, they claim 99.9% accuracy, but they were using an appalling method. When you use a properly mathematically correct method, which is standard deviation, their figure is actually 91.6%. Now, that's still really good, right? That they could tell something that Shakespeare is. But on a play-by-play basis, it's not at all robust. It would suggest that Julius Caesar is only 67.5% Shakespeare's, Henry V is 65% Shakespeare's. I don't think that's true. Genre skews the results completely, and that's really critical for Marlowe's canon, because Marlowe's canon is genre skewed. It is basically tragedy, it's historical tragedy, tragedies and histories. The taming of the shrew, where you use matched data set sizes, trying to compare a Marlowe data set, which is the orange one, okay, and Shakespeare data set. This is the blue one here, the blue square, that's 4 Shakespeare histories analysed with ZETA. You don't need to know the technical stuff. The taming of the shrew is just 0% Shakespeare, so it's all the grey stuff in the middle. If you use a history Shakespeare data set, the point is that you can't, Marlowe's canon is genre skewed already. You can't properly use it for large parts of Shakespeare's canon, because that method won't even spot the Shakespeare comedies of Shakespeare's if you use a similarly genre skewed Shakespeare base data set. I hope that makes sense. The Jew of Malta, by their method, is 35% Marlowe's and 25% Shakespeare's, and the rest falls into no man's land. And the reason is actually, I think, because there is quite a lot of comedy. It's a farce, in fact. It says it's the tragical history of the Jew of Malta, but it's basically a farce. It's like the Merchant of Venice with bad jokes. The no man's land is probably the comedy stuff that falls in there. But, you know, when genre skews results that much, you can't do a proper analysis. Dr. Faustus, by their method, is only 24% Marlowe, and I don't think that's correct either. That's comparing it with pre-1600 Shakespeare histories and tragedies. And the ZETA sub-method that was used to detect Marlowe's style in Henry VI, Part 1, cannot detect Hamlet as Shakespeare's. I think if a method can't detect that Hamlet was written by Shakespeare, it's probably not a very good method. I'm only going to do one slide for, it seems to have missed the title off, but this is for the word associate, WANs, networks, word networks. There are two lots, I've just summarized, this is really the work of Professor Risby with a little bit from me, but there's 2 lots of mathematical fudge, which is really disastrous. They have just fudged stuff. They discard their own definition in order to make data fit. Their accuracy is much lower than it's claimed. They use the same set of data for training and validating the method, which is unscientific and wrong. A significant amount of data is discarded in the process, and the method appears to be, in short, measuring data set size. And when you're measuring data set size, Shakespeare obviously wins, much bigger canon. However, what I would say is, even though the method's claiming to tell Marlowe's style apart from Shakespeare's and say that, oh, yeah, here's the 2 different styles, we can tell them apart, even though those methods do not do what they claim, Marlowe's style is certainly still detectable in the canon, as all those other quotes suggest, as all the earlier scholars' work would suggest, and not just in the Henry VI plays. So let's look at collaboration versus co-authorship. I think this is an important distinction. People don't always make it, but let's look at the term. I use co-authorship, and this is why. Collaboration suggests something done at the same time in the same place with personal interaction and full author knowledge. And co-authorship can cover that, but it can also cover something that's asynchronous. It's done at a different time. It can include later rewrites and additions. It can include editing. It can include the original author being completely unaware. You know, they could have died and someone's come in and, well, like what George Chapman thought he was doing with Hero and Leander. That's co-authorship, right? Marlowe had no hand in that, would not have sanctioned such a crummy writer. Sorry, George, I'm finishing his poem. Brian Vickers got it right with Shakespeare Co-author 2002, which is really the first, I would say, Stratfordian book, mainstream academic book that was really making a strong case post-disintegrationist close down that happened, you know, in the 1920s for the co-authorship of certain plays. And he makes it on a very traditional basis, being favoured certain other stylistic markers that traditional literary scholars use. Then you get New Oxford Shakespeare in 2016 coming up with, you know, up to a third of Shakespeare plays are co-authored. And this is now a mainstream view because they have so much clout. And so people will happily tell you things are co-authored, but be careful if people are using the word collaboration, because collaboration suggests something that is completely not proven and can't be proven. The reason why I think sometimes people like to talk about collaboration, especially if they're Stratfordians, is because there can't be a hidden author with collaboration. Co-authorship, on the other hand, I do think, you know, is that a softening up for group theory? Are the Stratfordians going, you know, we can't say we're wrong, but maybe we could just allow that there are multiple hands. And so I wonder. However, the central single author, the idea of a central single author still really dominates. I want to talk just briefly, because originally this talk was planned to go alongside some other talks. The idea with both Oxford and with the Countess of Pembroke that there was sort of salon or some kind of circle of writers that was organised by those candidates, which kind of allows for other hands. It seems to me it's a little bit of a, is it more of a collaboration than a co-authorship thing? Maybe. The evidence, there are an unusual number of dedications to Oxford at the time, which indicates he was a patron of the literary arts. This is not the same as running a scriptorium, though, which is a term I sometimes see. Yeah, other evidence I was told is strong was that Robert Greene calls Oxford Maecenas. However, Robert Greene does call everyone Maecenas. Well, at least 6 people that I found, not just Oxford. Okay, so Oxford was one of the 6. In fact, I found a Stratfordian scholar who said it's one of his favourite things to call a patron. So no, I see no evidence whatsoever. Not to say that it didn't happen, but there really isn't any evidence for a scriptorium or a salon of any kind with Oxford. And the salon I do with Mary Sidney, I mean, salon, the idea of a salon didn't really arise until sort of, you know, France, 18th century, really. But the idea of the Sidney Circle, I have to say, has been somewhat debunked by scholars in that field. There is minimal evidence for it. We look at the Richard Hillman essay that I've put there. So again, I like evidence. I think evidence is important. We don't really have any evidence for that kind of thing going on. My own reservations about group theory, I do have some, is sonnets. The sonnets are not co-authored. Poems are single author enterprises, and these are, even Stanley Wells and Paul Emerson admit, they're personal biographical. So the sonnets are not co-authored, so somebody is responsible for the sonnets. Plays might be co-authored for multiple reasons. There can be later editions, rewrites, etc. I absolutely accept that. Doesn't mean, it doesn't suggest the kind of co-authorship that sometimes people are putting forward. I do think there's a singular intelligence behind these plays. I think there's a singular interest in certain themes, which I discussed, and other themes, of course. Other themes are available. Despite certain glitches and some bits that are shonky, there is a fundamental coherence in style across the Shakespeare canon. For example, the development of feminine endings, which increases throughout the canon. You know, if you look at the traditional dating of the plays, the use of hendiades and enchantment, which also increases as time goes on, and certain imagery and the way image clusters are used. So I see, again, that doesn't work very well with me with group theory. You feel like there has to be someone at the center of things holding it together, making a coherent body of work. But I will allow that there's some editing has definitely happened, probably at the point of the folio, and I will also accept some possible Francis Bacon involvement in that project. I want to talk a bit very quickly about Elizabethan Co-authorship of plays more generally. Sadly, we obviously don't have anything for the Globe and King's Men or Chamberlain's Men, but we do have Helen Slow's Diary at the Rose. And that shows that from summer 1597 to the summer of 1600, 60% of the plays mentioned are co-authored, in the sense that multiple authors are being paid to produce those plays, 30 out of the 52. And in the same period, 32 plays were published, and all of them were published under a single name. And in fact, in the 40 years from 1584 to 1623, when the folios published, I should say only 12% of plays published were under more than one name. And some of those were, like two names, like Beaumont and Fletcher is basically a brand. So the question you need to ask yourself is, when you have so many plays being co-authored, but published ones hardly ever appear to be, is this due to quality issues or misrepresentation? So is it that co-authored plays are a bit crap and therefore they can't really stand up as literature and get printed and sold as such? Or is it because a co-authored play to be sold as literature has to go under a single name? There is some evidence of the latter. We have at least one instance where something that was clearly written by several people, according to Henslow's diary, gets published as a sole author's work. I mean, that kind of thing happens on films all the time, right? Getting your screen credit. It's not, the screen credit isn't necessarily who did most of the work. And in poetry anthology, England's Parnassus, various plays where the poetry from the plays is quoted misrepresented a single author when they're actually multiple author. But I do have the question, does collaborative writing lead to genius writing, especially when it comes to drama? We'll come back to that, just touch on it. But I wanted to say this was originally what I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be delivering this on October the 15th for this multi-speaker event, The Birth of a Genius, the many hands make light work versus the birth of a genius. So a little comment on that, many hands versus literary genius. Many people working together do not tend to produce works of outstanding literature. I say films, yes, comedy, yes, but I think for literature, a singular broad vision is required. Not many works of great literature, things that last the test of time, stand the test of time, are multi-authored in the way that this many hands idea comes up. As I say, I will allow for later additions, bits of editing, the little contributions here and there, but not that kind of idea. I say that geniuses are not born, but made. And I think the things that make a genius are some kind of innate intelligence, something to build on, and education, and then the ability to focus and intense focus, developing for an area of expertise or a skill. What I would say is that Marlowe is already recognized at the age of 29 as being something of a genius, of the theatre. He was already an exceptional writer. And then if Marlowe's theory is true, if that actually happened to him, this extraordinary life event of having to escape death by faking your death, with the help of your Secret Service colleagues, going into exile, living, under assumed names or an assumed name, having someone else represent your work and their name on your work. I think that leads to a broader perspective, which leads to, suffering, but also in due course, great wisdom. I think also he did have, in those circumstances, let's say those circumstances occurred, the time to write and think and read and little else. And there would also be perhaps a spiritual awakening caused by the crisis and the suffering. And I say this because the reason why Shakespeare's works have endured for 400 years is because he has so much to tell us that feels deeply, deeply true, that resonates with us as truths about the human spirit and the human experience. So these are the ways in which I think, why people say, why haven't we had more than one Shakespeare in 400 years? Well, maybe there was just an exceptional set of circumstances, but it wasn't being born to a glovemaker's son in Stratford upon Avon. In summary, I would say a proof of authorship by stylometry is certainly with current methods and possibly at all, given my knowledge of how computing works and data crunching and what size data sets you need, I would say it is impossible. I don't think we're going to be able to prove authorship by computational stylistics or stylometry. There is no evidence of salon style collaboration. If you want to give me some, sure, I'll look at it. Single author, in my view, a single author produced the majority of the Shakespeare canon. There is some content added by other hands. And Marlowe's case for primary author is stronger than most people give it credit for. And I think this is due entirely to 1593. It's due entirely to, well, obviously, that if they think, well, he did die, well, obviously then that his case is kind of wiped out if you don't allow the possibility that he survived. And the other thing is because, you know, his reputation really was destroyed in that event. It was destroyed sort of posthumously. And so people sort of think of him as this sort of, you know, bad boy of Elizabethan theatre, you know, a sort of thug, you know, he was violent, you know, he was a young hothead, not allowing A, that we're getting that version of him through his enemies, and B, that, you know, everyone when they're 29 is not their best self. But, you know, I don't think he was indeed as he is depicted. People can't imagine that person being the author of the Shakespeare canon, which I completely understand. But I think his case is stronger than all that. If you're interested in reading some of the here in very small print, on the right-hand side, it shows some of the articles that I've written that are all authorship question connected, that were published in academic journals. And if you copy the QR code, I believe it should work, or the bit.ly thing, it will take you to a little file where you can download them all and read them at your leisure.